to Safe Inside, brought to you by TheraTribe. I'm Jeremy Loomis, and these are my conversations with Sandra Fields, an LPC and certified clinical trauma treatment provider with over 35 years' experience helping people who have been through trauma. Welcome back to Safe Inside, the TheraTribe podcast. I'm Jeremy.
And I'm Sandy.
And today we have another guest. Sandy, would you like to introduce?
I would. We have Kat here today. Kat's going to talk about her experience with trauma and trauma treatment. I'm hoping that there's some recovery in that part too. And Kat, we're glad you're here with us today.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited.
Yeah, we are excited too. So
yeah, it's great to have you here.
Well, Kat, let's go ahead and just jump right into it because, we have the episodes aren't like really long. So let's go ahead and get into it. So why don't you, if you don't mind, giving us kind of an overview of the types of trauma that you might have experienced and where we might go today.
Okay. So when I first thought about the idea of being on the podcast and trauma, I thought, oh boy, I got a bucket of that we can go through. So, long-term childhood trauma. My father was an abusive alcoholic. And both of my parents have been significantly neglectful, if not at the same time, throughout my childhood, kind of in tandem. But so that is a very difficult thing that I've realized that it affected me throughout my life, but I wasn't aware of it until more of adulthood. That neglect and that it changing how I view myself, how I view my worth, my I guess worth in relationships and my self-esteem. And then I've also had some issues with episodes of sexual trauma throughout my life. So when I was a young girl, I was assaulted by a neighborhood friend. Assaulted by an older girl, and then sexually assaulted. And then I guess it started in high school. I was sexually assaulted several times in high school. And then I had a break from it for a little while, and I went through a divorce. And after the divorce, I had to get back in there, get back into the dating scene. And I've had one episode of sexual assault during a date. And then I've also had two issues with two big issues with coworkers sexually assaulting me that I met through the hospital. And then or just I guess I would say like sexual harassment, like bosses or people who are supposed to be higher level than me in the hospital, saying inappropriate things, touching me, things like that. So those are the different types of trauma I think about. And then also through my job and career, I work in medicine, and there have been things I've seen and heard that have kind of sat with me. And those are more, it's easier to separate that in my head, those things, those types of traumas, because it's work-related trauma and it's medical-related trauma. And it's like, oh, well, that didn't happen to me. That wasn't about me. Though, that was the patient. And so it has been a little bit easier for me to kind of separate that. But some of the issues with my parents, and then the issues with my sexual trauma, that has more been ingrained in me of like who I am and in my past. And those have been the things that I feel like have affected me more dramatically.
Yeah. And, Kat, it's not uncommon for people who have experienced trauma as children to be more at risk for re-victimization in different ways, especially boundary violations such as sexual trauma, things like that. And so your experience, unfortunately, is not as uncommon as I would like to believe,
Mhm.
unfortunately. So it takes a lot of courage to come on here and tell us all of those things. So thank you for that.
Well, thank you. When I was younger, I would never have told anybody anything, and I think that's part of that's something I want to help other people with and change other people's perspective, is because when I was a child and that older girl was 2 or 3 years older than me, and she was, showing me pornography and touching me inappropriately and things like that. And I remember I thought like that I did something wrong, and I felt like I would be in trouble, that I did something wrong. And I had a lot of guilt and shame around it. And then as I got older, then turned around to have guilt and shame around sex, not only from being from a Southern Christian conservative home where you're, taught that everything sexual is bad until you're 40 and married. But that was part of it, is because when I like got older and started to have like normal hormonal urges and had a boyfriend and things like that, I felt that it was bad and it was uncomfortable and that I shouldn't feel the way I felt. And I wish, I wish I would have felt comfortable telling someone about the things that had happened, because Lord knows what had happened to that little girl, that to teach her to do that. And so for me, it's now I have no problem telling people, well, I was raised by an abusive alcoholic, or, I was I was molested as a child, or, my first, what do you call it? My first, time like having vaginal intercourse. I was trying to think of the word intercourse. My first time having intercourse was non-consensual. So even though it was with someone that I had known for a year and a half in high school, and he was my boyfriend at the time, I always thought about it as, oh, well, he did that and I didn't want him to. But, like as an adult now, I can look back and say, well, that's rape. So my first intercourse was rape. So I feel like if we aren't talking about our traumas, then people aren't getting help, you know? So yeah, I'm happy to be here.
I'm first, and I'm trying to determine which rabbit trail to choose first.
Pick whatever you want.
I so appreciate your openness and just how much you're setting up a context for what we're talking about today. And one of the first things that I'd love to hear more about, I want to ask about what your identity formation between then and now even looked like. But I think before we go there, I really want to hear, what did it look like for you growing up into those experiences? Because my assumption would be, because why wouldn't you make this meaning out of it? This must just be the way that the world is, and this must be what's normal to expect the rest of my life to look like.
Yes.
How do you first of all, how do you even be okay from day to day when that's what experience is starting to tell you to expect?
Yes. So are you more talking about the sexual trauma, or?
That's yes. Yeah. But take that whatever direction makes sense to you.
Yeah. So I think partly the, raised by abusive alcoholic, my dad was very strict, and it was women and children are to be seen and not heard. And though he wanted a high performer, he wanted me to be the best soccer player, the best runner, the best tennis player. After a game, why didn't you catch her? You could run just as fast as her. So you had to be the best. You had to have all A's, you had to be the best in the class. And he expected that level of performance from you. But then at home, he expected you to keep the house clean, keep your room clean, keep food on the table, everything in its place. And then you were to be seen and not heard. And he would call me Cinderella, which my name's not, it's Catherine, but I go by Cat. So him calling me Cinderella was just him being an ass. And so that was how I was raised. So you keep your mouth shut, and you don't vocalize things when they bother you or when you're upset or when bad things happen. And so I think, I didn't say much about the child molestation and Sandy, correct me if I'm wrong. Like, I don't know if you call it something else if it's a child to child.
Yeah.
But
well, it depends. Felt like a molestation to you, and so therefore it was.
yeah.
Most likely, this young girl was probably sexually reactive,
Yes.
which meant because she was young as well, and so the sexual behavior that she exhibited was above normal developmental sexual activity. And so we can assume she was sexually reactive, which means that she was probably reenacting her own sexual trauma. However, Kat was the recipient of this, which meant that now Kat has been sexually abused.
Yeah. Which you and I have talked about before. And so I feel that that's one of the reasons why I felt uncomfortable telling my parents about what happened, is because you sweep everything under the rug, and you don't talk about things when they bother you unless it's violent outburst. So unless dad's mad, everything's copacetic, everything's chill, man, and that's how he wanted his house, and how he wanted your life. And so I just felt like it was, I think there was a lot of shame and there was a lot of hiding. And then when I look into, I was 15, a month before I was 16, was when I had, when I was raped by my high school boyfriend. I was going to say when I had sex for the first time, but no, when I was raped by my high school boyfriend. And that was hard for me because, he and I had rules and we were okay with certain sexual acts, and he was supposed to respect my boundaries and respect my rules. And so, I'm 15 and he's 17, and we're fooling around in his parents' basement, so you don't want to go home and tell mom and dad that. And that was one of the first times I realized, like, okay, well, the man's just going to do whatever he wants to do, and you have to be okay with it. Like, if you're gonna start something sexual with a man, then you just have to be okay with whatever he wants to do. And your place in life is to please a man, and your place in life is to keep them happy and make them want to stay with you. Because if the man doesn't want to stay with you, then you must not be worthy. And I think that's partly coming from some of my mother trauma, because my mom stayed with an abusive alcoholic who cheated on her for 4 or 5 years. So I was trained that and like raised in that. And then that's kind of what started my viewpoint towards men, which is not, it's not a safe place to be. In my head, I view men as like evil monsters that hide under happy faces and will treat you well at first, or who will kind of trick you, and then behind closed doors, that's when they do whatever they want to with you. And I am used to not, I guess, feeling that like I can't trust them, and you never know what's going to happen, and that they could all, rape you or hit you or any number of things. So that is hard for me with my line of work, because I do, I care. I'm in the medical field. I care for people. I serve people. I love people. I want to help people. And then sometimes, like, if something happens, I think, man, like, is he a monster underneath that? because he was just really rude or very angry, or I heard the way he talked to his wife, or and I just kind of shrink away and think, oh, is he a bad man? you know and then in my experiences dating, I want to believe that everybody is kind and honest and everyone is um loving and would not hurt people, but my experience is the opposite. And I found a few good men out there in the world, but yeah, it is hard. It's hard for me to work through those like experiences and trauma and heal from that, and know that like not everyone would treat you that way. But at the same time, I try to also be like careful and remind myself of safety, and I feel like I may be a little overly paranoid sometimes. When I walk down an alley, first thing I think about is all the stuff that man who turns a corner could do to me, and I know women are scared every day, everywhere. And I think that I put on a brave face, and I do have a very bubbly personality, and I am strong, and I am independent, and I am a brave person. But I think that underneath it, I am a terrified little girl.
No, Kat, we know the statistics say that 1 in 3 women are sexually assaulted in their lifetime. 1 in 3.
Which is that's an enormous number.
It's an enormous number. The statistics also show that almost 100% of women have been scared by men at some point in their lifetime. At least once, have been afraid of harm at least one time in their life. And not to discount your experience, Kat, because you were raised, as you said, with an abusive alcoholic father who demanded you to basically be what it is that he needed, maybe an extension of himself. At the same time, your preferences didn't matter. And so you're right, you were somewhat sort of set up, which is why that safety mechanism that many people have when we're born, that we set these boundaries and we try to stay safe, it sort of breaks that. In non-clinical language, it sort of breaks that. And part of trauma treatment is actually helping the client enhance safety. It might be that, Kat, for you, that a lot of the times being paranoid might be wise. In your chosen profession, the amount of sexual harassment and things is much greater than in other professions. If you were a first grade teacher, the ratio would go down a little bit.
Yes.
So that paranoia to some degree is actually necessary in order to stay healthy and safe, but you also don't want to live your life afraid of everybody that you meet. There's that balance that's hard to find, especially not just as a woman, but a woman who's experienced significant trauma in your life. Kat, I'm going to change directions just slightly, if that's okay with you.
You drive the boat.
Well, I'd like to ask you about one of the things that we talked about when you were coming on here, is that mind-body connection a bit. As you're talking about your fear and you're talking about your trauma and trauma responses, can you maybe, for people who are listening, articulate some ways in which that trauma shows up in you, like in your body and your feelings, that kind of thing, to show the impact of all of that past trauma on you today, who is you are a very accomplished professional woman who, like you said, is strong and independent and brave, and yet it still has an impact on you today. So could you share that with us?
Yes. When you ask that question, I think of two things. I think of like a example of when I noticed it at work. And that was I guess more of a work related trauma, like we talked about earlier. So we had a a month-old baby who came into the ER, and he was dead on arrival. And his father was away at work, and his mother was with him, and she brought him in, or she called the ambulance, and we worked on that child for over an hour, close to 2 hours, doing, code blue, trying to resuscitate him. And basically we continued because the mother wanted, even though we knew the baby wasn't going to come back, but also waiting for the father. And I remember after that, like, that was very emotional, you know, and I didn't get emotional. I didn't, because I kept my professional hat on, so I didn't cry and I didn't get emotional. But I remember for days afterwards being nauseated, and having my chest just ache, like deep in my center of my chest just hurt. I felt like I had it felt like someone had ripped my heart out. And of course I tried to ignore it. And I'm thankful that you walked me through that. But and then I think about, my daily life, and I think, I am a happy person, and I do love my life that I'm building, and there are things in my life that are very joyous, but I find myself sitting there clenching my jaw at all times, grinding my teeth, clenching my jaw. My jaw will ache. The muscles in my face that go from like the bottom jawbone, that mandible, that go up into my head and like near my ears, like the temporal muscles will ache and hurt. I'll get headaches. My neck will hurt. I'll sit there with my shoulders up by my ears. My shoulder, like my what are they called, traps, muscles will ache. And I'm just so tense all over. And I'm holding my breath, and I am on edge all the time. And so I do things to, like, and that's how I notice, like, it in my body, is that there's pain, there's chronic headaches, there's chronic neck pain and shoulder pain, and then there's just the tenseness, and it's like I'm always just waiting for the next bomb to hit, and then of course I have noticed that over the years, and I try to do things like breathing techniques and recognizing those things in my body, recognizing my clenched jaw, and I'll say, unclench your jaw. I'll say it. Why are you clenching your jaw? Unclench your jaw. Relax your face, and I'll stretch my jaw out and work on that. And I've gone to a dentist, and I do sleep in a very attractive, just super cute mouth guard. And that does help with the headaches and the migraines, because I can't clench and grind in my sleep, because I used to wake up with headaches, wake up with migraines. And so those are things I do. And then exercising for me is a huge physical release. I was a big athlete, played 4 varsity sports in high school. And I always was very active. And so when I went to college and I wasn't having to do competitive sports anymore, I wasn't exercising, that's when I started noticing the jaw clenching and the headaches and the neck pain and the shoulder, like my traps pain. And I realized later in life that when I lift heavy weights, or when I run, or if I do like HIIT exercises that get my heart rate up, I can relax my body so much easier. I know that some people do yoga or they do mindful meditation and whatever, but I think maybe because of my childhood and how I was raised, for me, I need that vigorous exercise. I need the running, or I need sprint work, or I need heavy, like lifting heavy weights, because I really need to break a sweat and I need to get my heart rate up. And if I'm good about taking care of my body and I'm good about taking care of myself and I do those things, the clenched jaw, the headache, the having my shoulders up to my ears, that's I notice those less and less.
You mentioned something too, Kat. You said that you have to notice these things because it's been a pattern that it's not noticed, it's minimized, and as if these things are sort of the status quo. This is what life is.
Oh yeah.
So can you talk about the process of learning how to not minimize all of these things and recognize them for what they are?
Well, number one, I'd recommend getting a very good therapist.
Yes, that's number one.
I'm not going to say that's a bad idea.
It's a great idea. I would recommend, I would say for me, it's been a journey. It's been a 2-year journey. I didn't get a therapist. I was not good at being introspective. I was very, I don't know, I think we've said this before, I was like a rhino. I would just put my head down and I would just blast through any wall or any obstacle. I treated my body like a machine, and I didn't treat it like a good machine. I didn't treat it like a car where you'd like redo the oil and do all the maintenance. I mean, I treated it like a machine that would just never break down. I wouldn't feed it. I wouldn't sleep. I would ignore pain, physical pain, emotional pain. I would ignore trauma. I would ignore everything. And I think that looking back in my life, that's part of the reason why I have poor memories, like poor availability to access my memories, from childhood, from high school, college. You know, I went on a 6-month study abroad, and I was very blessed to be able to do that. And I worked all summer long, multiple jobs, saved up money, went to do that, had a blast, wonderful time. I come back, me and all the girls and I are still friends, and they bring up memories and they talk about things, and they want to chit chat and get back together and reminisce. And I don't remember any of the crap that they're talking about. I spent all that time and all that hard-earned money, and got to go all across Europe for 6 months, and I have zero memories of it.
You know, and I don't want to interrupt you, but
Go ahead,
I do think it's worth pointing out, for the sake of those listening or watching, that, you know, we're talking about trauma here, and you might already be familiar with this idea of blocking out traumatic memories, but we're seeing that just kind of like how there's just one volume knob for all your emotions. You can't decide you're going to feel less sadness without feeling less in general. You know, you're talking about losing memories, even when what you're experiencing was a good time, and maybe even like a highlight. One thing's that'll be on your highlight reel at the end of life, right?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Like this is no joke. You know,
yeah.
I'm talking about, you know, you said 2 years, right, so far as a journey?
Yeah. So 2 years in therapy. And when I'm just going to put you on blast, Sandy. So when Sandy and I started, when we met, it was the best day of my life. No. But it really was a great day. It was a great day for me. And I finally had said that enough's enough. I was so miserable and so unhappy. And I was suicidal. And I said, I just can't do it anymore. I had ignored my feelings and my bad thoughts and my body. And I said, you know, I need help. And I've been very stubborn my entire life. So she's laughing because she knows it's true.
I am.
I mean, does stubbornness give you some sense of agency, some sense of control in an otherwise chaotic life?
Yes.
So the word is tenacious. It's a nice
Yeah.
word.
Yes,
It's a
no.
nice word.
And so I remember when Sandy and I met, I had the ability to know if I was happy, if I was sad, or if I was mad. And mad was rare. Usually I was I would say I was a sad person. I have naturally like a happy personality and I'm a bubbly person. And I love people. I love life. I love, I find happiness anywhere and everywhere, and I can focus on the good most of the time. But deep in my core, I had this dark shadow of sadness that overtook my happy most of my days. And I feel like I was unaware of um my physical manifestations of my trauma. But I also was unaware of the level of my trauma. Like I thought, well, it's normal to have a dad who beats the shit out of you, or it's normal to have a mom tell you that she doesn't want to be your mom anymore and that you can raise yourself. And, so you're 14. I've done my job. I'm done with you. And I always looked around and saw other people's families, and I was always jealous, and I was always jealous of my friends. And I always tried to, insert myself into families of romantic partners throughout my life, because I knew I got the kind of the shitty end of the stick, like I was like, I didn't, mine aren't the best. But and especially with my sexual trauma, I didn't even remember the childhood like molestation that happened when I was probably 8 or so. I didn't even remember it until I was in college. And actually one of my dear guy friends opened up to me about it, that it had happened to him. And my first thought was, well, doesn't everybody have someone in the neighborhood that like touches them inappropriately when they're growing up? Isn't that kind of normal? And I realized, I'm watching him cry from it, and he was a little older when his trauma happened. And I remember thinking that the shame started coming in, and I remember noticing, okay, it obviously isn't normal or healthy or expected life. And so there were times when I was at the hospital at work, when I would notice my physical not being able to take deep breaths, not being able to relax, chronic headaches. I lived on ibuprofen. And even though I would force myself to eat, I'd have caffeine, I'd force myself to have enough water. I got 8 hours of sleep last night. Well, I'm following all my rules. Why am I still having headaches? And through the past 2 years, I've learned that there are more emotions than happy and sad. I've learned to that I had to teach myself to check into my body and to check on me, because as a child, I wasn't taught, how are you feeling? I wasn't taught to check in on myself. I was taught to sit with your hands under your legs so that you don't get in trouble for being antsy, and to keep your mouth shut. And so I was taught to ignore things, and I became a master at it. And now I'm having to like undo that training and learn how to get to know myself, and to say, like, I mean, just there's times when Sandy and I are talking, and I'm like, hey, I noticed that guy made me uncomfortable, because I used to not be able to notice, or that person, they had red flags. They made me feel uncomfortable. That doesn't seem right. Or, I told her, I noticed I felt this way when X, Y, and Z. And usually I had no ability to monitor any emotion or feeling, or because I did what you said, I just turned all the volumes off. All my knobs were off, and living in that numbness, the pain still breaks through.
Mhm.
And so it's really not sustainable or pleasant. And after 2 years of like therapy we did a lot of therapy. We did a lot of therapy. And I in learning about myself and I actually, and Jeremy, this is, you'll probably won't be surprised, I'm extroverted, but I never
What?
wanted to, I know, I never wanted to be alone. I couldn't be alone. And I remember as a child, I would like, when I had to be alone, I would just go to the movies by myself because I would rather be watching the world or watching someone's life, or being in the movies would keep me from feeling alone, and I didn't want to be alone. And as a child, it's like I was that annoying kid in the neighborhood who rode my bike from friend's house to friend's house. Like when Sarah's mom said I had to go, it's fine. Elizabeth lives down the street, get on my bike and go to her house, because I didn't want to be at my house. It wasn't safe. And then also I didn't want to be alone.
Yeah.
And so I think part of it is that was my way of ignoring what was happening to me and ignoring what I was feeling on the inside. And that translated to adulthood. I was always busy. I always extended myself and my schedule, and always filled it with work or extracurriculars or friends. And romantic partners, and I never wanted to be alone. And it's just funny because now I finally like being alone. And I finally like my space, and I like my time alone. And
How unexpected was that as a personal development?
so weird. Like I remember I told Sandy one time, she said, I like being by myself. She said, I like my own company. I'm great company. And I thought, she's weird.
Well, that's probably true.
She must be introverted, and she must be bored a lot. And now I like my own company. I like to do things with me, and I have a good time even if I'm by myself. And sometimes I prefer it. Like I would prefer being by myself than be with someone that I can only have a superficial relationship with, or I can't be authentic with. And I do realize like how much my alone time is beneficial for me and necessary for me and healing for me. And I recognize, I do learn a lot from others. Like I recognize how I respond to other people, and I recognize like my body and my feelings and my mind and my thoughts. And sometimes you need that external stimulation to learn things about yourself. But yes, it was I think I told Sandy this the other day, and if I didn't, I was at least thinking about it. I feel like my personality and who I am as a person has so much been affected by my trauma that I don't even know who I really am.
Mm.
I'm 32 years old, and I think I am a certain way. And throughout these 2 years of healing and 2 years of introspective work and 2 years of getting to know myself, sometimes I think, well, maybe I'm not who I thought I was all along. And maybe that's not part of my that's not actually my personality. That's part of my trauma. And that is a little scary. Not to be 30, I'm almost 33, and to be still realizing like, oh, I don't really know myself that well, or what's my trauma and what's actually me.
Mhm.
And then also how much of that has been a trauma response since I was a wee girl, and that really is ingrained in me, and that's okay too. But I think those are the things that it's been interesting, and it's been kind of, sometimes it's funny and sometimes it's sad, not knowing what's me and what's my trauma.
And part of that's actually an experience that most people experience when they have come from childhood trauma. Knowing
Mhm.
who they are is almost impossible, whether it's themselves or if it's a trauma response or a way to just stay safe. Even, people pleasing. Kat, you mentioned that you have a bubbly personality and you like to make people laugh and feel good around you. That might be your personality, or it might be a trauma response where you're trying to make sure that you stay safe. And it's kind of scary, like Kat said, to not know what part is me, what part is a trauma response
Mhm.
sometimes. And yet there's a cool piece to this too, because as you work through trauma and you heal more and more, and you look to see what pieces are trauma responses, kind of discovering who you are for the first time and realizing how cool of a person you are, and how all of these things without that trauma can be really also very cool. But it is a very scary process. And it
Yeah.
takes some courage to do that, and some willingness to look at pieces of your life that may or may not feel good. We talk about shadow work, where we have to look at those pieces of us that we feel are unacceptable, but yet that's part of trauma work. It's looking at those pieces and saying, okay, this actually isn't a trauma response. This is just some ugliness in me, and I'm going to have to own it. It takes a lot of bravery for that too. And I know Kat's been doing a lot of that work lately.
Yeah.
So yeah.
It sounds so overwhelming in such a specific way to have to not be able to trust your own intuition, not be able to develop your own intuition. And and the theme that I've heard throughout our talk today was, not only were you not allowed to have a voice in childhood, which means you were kind of only able to show up in a superficial way because you weren't allowed to be known,
Agreed.
but you were finding the same thing happening in your assessment of other people who showed any sort of favor to you. A guy would show up, and if he was being kind, it was a means to an end. And without being able to rely on your own intuition throughout those situations, all you could recognize were patterns. Is that fair to say?
Yes. And I felt like it was very rare to find someone who was authentic. Whether it was in my family or whether it was in individuals who came in my life. And I think even as a child, craved that realness and that authenticness. And I have, in a weird way, I have always been a little bit of the black sheep in the family who was outspoken and a little bit more authentic. Granted, did I get kicked out of the family dinner all the time? Was I told I had to leave on holidays all the time? Was I told I am not allowed to be myself in certain situations? Yes, all the time. And so outside of the home, I think I kind of like emotionally, personality word vomited on anyone who would listen to me. I would be wild and loud, and I feel sorry for every soccer coach I've ever had. I was the kid who they were like, go run laps because you're driving me nuts. And I was like, ah! Like running circles around everybody because I wasn't allowed to express any of that energy, personality, wildness at home. And so I craved being me. I craved being around people who were outspoken and authentic and were themselves. And I think I kind of I have no boundaries. I'm now building them, but 2 years ago you met me, I had no boundaries. And so a friend and I were actually taking a personality quiz, the Enneagram quiz, and she was like, you have no boundaries. And I was like, excuse me. I was like, I have them now. They may be smaller than yours, but they are being built.
They are.
But she was teasing me, and she's a very good, loved friend. But I think that I would kind of like, emotionally just unload on people. And I didn't have good boundaries. And I look back now and I'm cringe. I'm like, oh, that poor child. Like,
Yeah, but
why-
remember that the cringe means that you've grown in that
Yes.
area.
grown,
Yes.
very much grown. But yes, I think I recognize this even as a kid and as a young adult. I recognized that that people were superficial and they weren't authentic and they weren't deep and they weren't honest. And people in my life would take advantage of me being kind and me being open and me being vulnerable and me being authentic. And I've even used the word gullible numerous times to describe myself, because I am honest and I'm honest and kind. And in my heart, I believe that people are all honest and kind. And I want that to be the case. And then because I've seen otherwise, that's kind of a dichotomy, I think, in myself, caused by the trauma. So I don't know if I answered your question, Jeremy. I feel like I was all over the
Well,
place.
that was great.
That's great. Well, Kat, I know we're getting close to the end, so I do want to give you an opportunity to say anything that you'd like to say to other people who might have experienced trauma in their life. Is there anything that you'd like to say to them?
Of course, you're gonna make me cry.
Apparently, that's my job.
I would just want to tell I would want to tell me that it's okay and you didn't do anything wrong and you didn't deserve any of the things that happened to you, and that you deserve better, and you are not your trauma, and that I'm proud of anybody who's listening to this podcast. I'm proud of anybody who's going to therapy. I'm proud of anybody who's, reading books or is taking care of their mental health or taking care of their physical health. It's easier to live in denial and to ignore everything and to not take care of you. And it's scary and hard, but so worthwhile to, go through treatment and therapy and to work on you and to help you. And, when you didn't have adults to help you with these things in your life as a kid, or whenever you have trauma as an adult and you have to take care of you, it's not easy. And I think that I want people to have hope that it gets better and it gets easier, and that they should be proud of themselves and they should know their worth, and they are not their trauma, and their trauma is something that happened to them and it does not say anything about them. And I pray and I hope that they come to terms with that and they start seeing them for who they are, lovely and worthy, and they start seeing their trauma for what it is. And it's shit luck. And it's something we have to deal with and we process. And I just wish them the best of luck.
Thank you,
Beautifully
Kat.
said.
Yes. Kat, thank you so much for coming on to Safe Inside today. Your bravery is inspiring. So thank you.
Thank you.
Also, thank you for being so vulnerable with us and with people who are listening. I'm sure it will be helpful to them.
Oh yeah, that's the thing, right? And it sounds like you've already realized this. We kind of have to lead by example in order to see any healing happen.
Yeah. So thank you. Well, Jeremy, I think that's it today.
I think that's it. Thanks so much for being with us, Kat. This has been a great episode. Next time, we're going to talk about how trauma is not a lifelong sentence. So join us for that. We'll talk soon.
All right, thank you.